Hi everybody, it's been 2 weeks since the last patch notes video, and that means we are back at it yet again here, 0.77 this time around, and let's start going over it. First of all, of course, like usual, we're going to talk about the patch thought changes, as well as a lot of the other things that are going to be added, just a couple of previews as you guys can see here. To start with, we're going to have a couple of adjustments in regards to battle zones that have been pretty prominent recently, not in just ranked games, but even in competitive as well. So we'll see a couple of changes throughout the patch in regards to that. We do see a couple of new items also being added as well. The Eye of Argos as well as Andromeda are going to be two additional transition weapons that will be added into the game. Of course, as I just mentioned, even more changes to battle zones. We are going to have a lot of them during this patch, and they're going to be very important, both from just the ranked side of things as well as the competitive side of things. There's been a lot of talk in regards to the battle zones for both of those areas, and they will be addressed in this patch. Couple other things as well, split farming in team modes being overly efficient. We'll see a slight nerf over onto that later on as well. And then just a small additional change, not exactly sure why this is a thing, but we'll have a slight name change from Mithril spelled with an I over onto Mithril spelled with a Y there instead. Alright, next up, we're going to be talking about a change that was announced to us quite a while back. In the 0.75 patch, there was a little bit of a note in part of the patch notes that did tell us that we're going to have individual character voice lines coming to pings, or ways to communicate with your teammates, and that will be added here. We do have a certain list of characters that will be getting these voice lines, and not all of the characters are going to have them when we start, but most likely we will see all of them having it down the road, as well as the characters in the future as well. Next up, as I mentioned in the patch change thought process in the direction section, we will be seeing some changes to the ranked LP system. In 0.76, a lot of people were very frustrated globally, actually. Even in the KR server, a lot of people were kind of struggling with this as well. We are going to see some changes so that, of course, getting kills, whether it's in the battle zone or outside of it, you are definitely going to be rewarded a lot better, hopefully, compared to before, and also making it even further a limitation for the battle zones as well, in regards to how well you can progress throughout the game in and of itself. And we will see in this section right here that they are going to be increasing the durations of the night times, and this is just to give you a little bit more time in between the battle zones as well as going for the objectives. This was also mentioned in the patch change thought process in the direction section. Yet another thing that was also mentioned in that section as well, shared EXP increases amongst slaying wild animals in duels and squads. Up in that section, it talked about how split farming was a little bit too overly efficient, so they will be farming a little bit better now in team modes where you are going to be with your teammates. They will be increasing the numbers with the EXP share that you do get throughout that. So try to hunt with your teammates if you can. And last but not least, we will see, again, more changes to the battle zones, just making it so that, a little bit more of a limitation. I talked about it up in this section. We're going to talk about it here again as well. The maximum amount of mastery that you can gain in the battle zones has been decreased yet again. We had this change in the last patch. We're going to be getting it here again in 0.77. As well as another change we also saw during 0.76. We were just getting a lot of repetition changes during this patch. You're going to have to stay dead a little bit longer compared to before. So a very similar change that we saw in 0.76 will be happening here yet again in 0.77. Okay, next up, we haven't had this section in quite a while. Augment changes are going to be existing in 0.77 patch. First up, we're going to see a little bit of a nerf for Red Sprite. The skill amplification scaling will be nerfed by about 3% towards the end game. Of course, that's not going to hurt too much when you think about 3%, but over the course of the game, it will hurt a little bit more for characters who do build up a lot of that amplification stat. Now, this is a change that I'm not fully in agreement with. Bitter Retribution will actually be seeing a massive buff here. Now, damage is going to be increased. Additional 2 damage per level of your character. Slow duration will be nerfed to 1.5 seconds instead of 2, but the cooldown getting cut by about 66%, down from 30 seconds to 10 seconds. Now, This change in and of itself, very confusing, at least personally for me, because Bitter Retribution has been seeing a lot more play during 0.75, 0.76, but they're buffing it here, which is slightly concerning to me because it's not even just the slow that, that was so good about Bitter Retribution. It's just the fact that during the duration of Bitter Retribution, it was very difficult to deal with the character chasing into you, but now they're making it even more accessible. Now, while the slow duration is still, nerfed, 1.5 seconds is still pretty massive considering how heavy the slow itself is. So I would definitely expect Bitter Retribution to be seeing a lot more play during this patch, just simply because of how good it might be for certain characters that wants to stay caught up to other characters. Next up, let's start talking about some of the character changes. First, Celine, Ava, as well as Kathy will all be seeing price reductions, seeing as it is a new patch. Not too surprising that some characters will get that, so we'll start off from there. Now, as per usual, we'll just kind of breeze through the characters. That really doesn't have that massive of a change, but we do have a couple of characters that I do want to talk about during this patch, so I will be prioritizing those a little bit more during this one. Leon, seeing a pretty big nerf there. 3 whole attack power, going to be down compared to before. And for Rozzy, we're going to see a bit of a nerf to Semtex and a little bit less of a reliable source of damage for Rozzy, as we are going to see a cooldown being added here as well throughout each individual rank. Li Dailin will be seeing a little bit of a change here as well. A lot of her base mobility is going to be shifted over onto her skill of the Spirited Kick here. As you can see, movement speed down, but the cooldown of her Q will be decreased by a whole 2 seconds. And to adjust for that, we will see a bit of a nerf in the damage on this skill as well. So again, Nimble Neuron has been trying to do this quite a lot recently in regards to shifting their base mobility from, the base mobility of the character into the skills that they have here instead, and trying to play around with the balance of the mobility in that character. And Li Dailin will be suffering from that a little bit here as well in regards to the base mobility. Next up, Marcus will also be seeing a nerf. This character has been going ham. As a matter of fact, there is a player in Korea who hit Immortal just by playing this character alone. He's been really insane over on that side, so he will be seeing a nerf here. Very good nowadays, especially if you can animation cancel your auto attacks with the axe skill. So very surprising to see a Marcus nerf, but at the same time, not too surprised, just knowing what's been going on over in Korea for myself. Bianca will also be seeing a bit of a buff here, where she will have a little bit more of an amplification scaling for her recovery over on circulation, which is super cool because you don't really build a lot of attack power on Bianca. Now it'll be a bit of an amplification scaling here for the healing as well for Bianca. Very, very nice. As well as a buff to the cooldown of Reign of Vampire Queen. Next up, Sua getting a buff. I personally do not like this buff. Sua has been, in my personal opinion, very strong, or at least okay. Seeing this buff right now, I feel like Sua is kind of in between the okay part as well as very good. Seeing this buff is going to make Sua players very happy, and that is actually a massive, massive buff just looking at the numbers as well. And of course, Sua in general just really works well around base cooldown nerfs to begin with, or even buffs, I should say, not nerfs. But this is a pretty massive buff, in my opinion, to the Sua players, and they'll definitely be happy with it. A little bit scared about this one, so do watch out for Suas during 0.76. Next up, Shukai going to be getting a buff here. Skill amplification per spear mastery going to be buffed up by about 0.03%. Well, actually, no, not 0.3. 0.3%. There we go. I'm getting all my numbers mixed up here, but we will see a buff over onto Shukai scaling for the late game. Cecilia will see a bit of a nerf here as well, just looking at the numbers. Minimum skill amplification addition from her passive going to be nerfed, as well as the maximum skill amplification being gained will also be nerfed as well. Sylvia, ever since 0.76 changes, has almost kind of changed up the way that she takes fights. Instead of being one of those sustainable mages, she becomes a little bit more of that frontline kind of, just a lot of your damage is front loaded, not really frontline, but we'll be even seeing more of a change as her base HP going to be increasing yet again here as well, and Radar Gun giving a lot more fuel gain compared to before to keep yourself in that fight more and more and more as you change into the bike form and the human form back and forth and back and forth. Adela Bat will be getting a buff. Nobody uses this thing. They're going to be buffing the skill amplification on this by 0.2%. Not exactly sure if that's really going to help Bat Adela, but it is there. We'll see if anyone really starts using this character's weapon. Sniper Rifle Aya will also be nerfed here as well. This has been an absolute menace. A lot of damage towards the mid to late game, especially because it's so hard to deal with her in the early stages of the game. She snowballs very quickly, and then after a certain point, she almost feels unstoppable. So a nerf to Aya definitely makes sense here. ISO will also be seeing a bit of a nerf here as well. The sustained damage seeming to be hurt a little bit. Guerrilla Warfare, the defense reduction will get nerfed, as well as the cooldown for Rebel Assault going to be nerfed here as well. Now, the menace of 0.76, Estelle, will be getting nerfed here, but she will be getting nerfed at least in the amplification section of it. There have been a lot of builds nowadays for Estelle. You have Amp, you have the consistent auto attack builds, you have the tank builds. In the character changes itself, we will see nerfs over onto the amplification style of Estelle. However, we're going to be talking about this later down the road when we talk about the weapons. But in my opinion, it's not. This patch itself doesn't really hit the core of Estelle and what the problem with what this character is. So on this section right here, when it comes to talking about the Estelle, it is going to be a nerf, and a lot of people are going to be happy about it because she has been such a dominating force in this game in recent times, even in solos as well. Just having a second health bar is absolutely massive for this character with the amount of consistent damage she has, as well as her tankiness. So a bit of a nerf in regards to the amplification side of things. But again, we'll talk about some of the problems that we're going to be having when we talk about weapons that she might be using later down the road. A small nerf over onto 11. Again, some mobility things that has been pretty consistent throughout the patch from what we've seen so far. IRM will actually be seeing a bit of a buff here, even more defense throughout the course of the game, as well as Cat Punch will be rooting down players a lot longer compared to before if you do hit them when the Cat Bell mark is hit. A nerf over onto Zahir when it comes to the throw mastery for the skill amplification, but we are seeing a little bit of that nerf being shifted in regards to the power just onto himself in and of itself. The character amplification scaling on the skills, we'll be seeing a bit of a buff here. As you can see, Eye of Azrael getting buffed by 5%, and Godiva also getting buffed by 5% as well. Dual Swords Jackie going to be getting nerfed here again. This has been still doing really well over on the Korean server, so not too surprised about this nerf here either. Yet again, we're getting an essay for Jenny in 0.77. Now, this time around for Jenny, we're going to be seeing a lot more of her consistent game mode. And a lot of people are saying, you know, these changes, especially during 0.76, a lot of people were wondering if this change was a good thing or not. And it was just something that was being talked about that kind of died down, but it seems like we're going to be having it here again. Even more consistency is what Nimblenron is looking for from Jenny. So a lot of changes in regards to her core kit alone, and then some cooldown changes for playdead as well. So a lot more accessible is this character going to be during 0.77. Camillo will see a bit of a base HP nerf. Weak Millo, I suppose, on that one, getting even more weaker Camillo. Carla will also be seeing a nerf. Salvage going to be losing a lot of base damage, and this is actually pretty massive because there has been new tech that has been found out by Carla players where you can actually pull 3 harpoons at once instead of 2, so these damage nerfs will definitely start stacking up over the course of time. For Carla players, definitely going to be happy that the scaling itself hasn't been touched, but the base damage is also going to hurt them a lot. Kathy will be also seeing a bit of a nerf or a little bit of a power shift, I will say. Amplification for Dagger will be a little bit nerfed, but for Double Bypass, you will see a bit more of an attack power scaling compared to before. Kiara will also see a bit of a buff, actually. I'm not entirely sure. Now, this is an interesting one. We're going to see a little bit of a nerf in regards to her default power with her basic attack power getting nerfed here, but play is slightly getting adjusted in regards to how it works. This skill for a very long time has been one where Kiara, you want to execute something to make sure that you refund some of the cooldown, whether it's on an animal or whether it's on a player. Of course, most optimally it's going to be on a character, but now they're removing that part entirely. Last Judgment, you will not be able to reduce the cooldown by 30%, and instead, the amount of cooldown that Plague has to begin with is going to be very low. 30 seconds at max level, of course 50 seconds for default, and it just continues to scale down. But a little bit of a different way and a lot more accessible for Kiara players, even if they don't physically execute anything with the Plague, they should still be able to have that ultimate up pretty reliably when they need it. Next up, Tazia, just a bit of a change in regards to how the stiletto works. Not a too big deal in regards to this character. Still very usable in regards to how she rotates through her skills, so this change shouldn't be too massive of a deal. Or, even more in and of itself, it's actually a buff over on the Tazia. Now that I read it, I was looking at these numbers, I'm like, wait a second, that's a buff. So yeah, Tazia is going to be getting a buff here in 0.77. Now, a slight mechanical change over onto Fiora. We're actually going to see her W, the disarm portion of her W will be removed, but we're going to see a bit more of an accessibility in regards to how Fiora wants to use that skill as part of her skill rotation instead of something that she uses on a character on a matchup by matchup basis here. So again, as you can see, the disarm portion of W will be gone, but the casting time reduced by 0.11 seconds, so it goes out faster, as well as the cooldown for it being a lot lower than before. So much more accessible for Fiora players that are going to be playing AMP. You're going to have another skill that you can actually do damage with instead of something that only use up against melee auto attackers. Next up, Hyejin will be slightly getting an adjustment in regards to how her skill works. The Omen's duration will be reduced from 15 seconds to 12, and her damage over the course of the skill will also be slightly nerfed, but at the same time buffed. For the late game, it is going to be buffed since you do have skill amplification scaling going up by a whole 20%. But in the early stages of the game, it's going to be nerfed as you do see the base damages across the board pretty low compared to before, and the attack power also decreasing as well for the scaling. Heart has been very strong in 0.76, so seeing a nerf here, not too surprising. Her W, the attack power increase, is going to be nerfed here, and her defense reduction per evolution is also going to be nerfed here as well. This character has been running absolutely rampant, just being able to obliterate anybody that she comes up against. Very easy to scale off of nowadays, very easy to snowball off on nowadays as well. So again, another heart nerf we're going to be seeing here in 0.77. Last but not least, Haze has been doing pretty good as well, especially after the addition of the battle zones, as they mentioned here. So we are going to see a bit of a nerf over onto her scaling portions for skill amp as well in 0.77. Next up, we're going to be talking about the weapons. Now, Vigor has been very accessible for a lot of characters, and they're going to be changing it up a little bit here. They're going to be changing the sustained damage by removing a little bit of that HP scaling damage that you do end up seeing from a lot of these Vigor weapons, and they're going to be adding a couple of other things that are a lot more, kind of, what would I say, shifting the power from the base damage that Vigor will do into other stats of Vigor, but I'm going to be mentioning this as we go on here. I don't know if these changes are necessarily healthy. We'll talk about that in just a second. But aside from that, let's start talking about some of these weapon changes here. First up, Glove. White Claw Punch will be getting a nerf. Permafrost also getting a nerf. Pretty simple ones for a Glove. Pistol will see Elegance getting a buff here. Molten Malachite, first Vigor change that we're going to be seeing. Less damage for the extra damage based on enemy test subjects' current HP. But instead, shifting the power over onto the additional attack speed that you gain and the additional attack power that you gain upon reaching the max of 4 stacks. Now, this is going to be pretty consistent across the board. I don't know if I like this. These stat changes are absolutely massive for the characters, especially the ones that can stack these very fast. Like, you think about Molten Malachite, you think about characters like Jenny, who just cycles through more and more autos over the course of time. We're even seeing the changes to Jenny being a lot more focused on the consistent damage that she can do, even if it might not be solely focused for this crit style build with the Molten Malachite. Still going to be very nice for characters like her to get the consistent damage out, so I'm not entirely sure if I like the way that Vigor is looking right now. Altair will also be seeing a bit of a power shift, lesser skill amp, but more attack speed. This weapon has been quite interesting during 0.76. Kind of interested to see where it's going to go during this patch as well. Next up, for guitars, the Wall, again, another weapon that has, if I remember correctly, the Vigor stat on it. Wonderful Tonight, also going to be getting a nerf here, and again, a similar change that we saw to the Molten Malachite for Vigor, where we're going to see less current enemies' HP damage, as well as more attack speed, as well as more attack power. Same thing here as well. Heart can stack this very, very easily. So more attack speed and more attack power when you hit 4 stacks. I think that very much makes up for the 1% health that you are losing in regards to the additional damage that you do. Juggernaut, going to be getting the same exact treatment here. Now, I mentioned earlier when it comes to Estelle that I had to talk about something here, and this portion right here is the exact part that I want to talk about. Estelle has been incredibly good in 0.76 internationally across the board. And this buff right here, in my opinion, makes it so that, of course, the extra damage based on enemies' test subjects' current HP is going to be hit a lot more, so her damage, her big burst damage with each auto attack is going to be hit. But these stat increases really makes it so Estelle has even more consistent damage, and if anything else, I feel like she's going to have even more compared to before. And we talked about earlier that Estelle's changes when it comes to the character itself was hitting mainly the amplification part. They didn't hit the auto attack version of it. So the change to Juggernaut here, a massive win in my opinion for Estelle characters. And even if that isn't the case, the changes to Vigor again, I don't know if it's necessarily healthy over the course of time, because looking at attack speed, I forgot to mention this earlier, but it's going to be increasing by a whole 4% per stack. So if you increase it to the maximum amount of stacks, you get a massive buff to the attack speed that you gain compared to before. And that, of course, for Estelle, enables her to do even more amounts of damage when she already has a ton of animation cancels to begin with. So a significant problem I think this patch is going to bring when it comes to dealing with Estelle's. I'm going to be very scared going up against any Axe characters in this patch as a whole. It's terrifying just looking at these changes. Let's take a look at the assault rifles, however. Attack from triple shots, we're going to be seeing a slight buff over onto that. Assault rifle has been slightly struggling in the past couple of patches. I mentioned this during 0.76, but it's something that players like me would never have dreamed of saying for a very long time, but we are seeing buffs over onto assault rifle nowadays, so an interesting there for characters that can run that weapon. Talk about rapiers, we're going to see Red Panther buffed. We did see, I think, Red Panther getting nerfed before, so a bit of a return of power over onto this weapon. Joyous, on the other hand, will be getting a bit of a nerf. Now, a new legendary, Eye of Argos, is going to be a needle as well as a force core. Very, very easy to build this as long as you have that force core. And we are going to be seeing that it is an amp rapier weapon that has biotic infusion on it. Very similar to Eye of Horus, instead it's just going to be on a weapon instead. For Bat, we're going to see a buff over onto Vajra, and for Nunchakus, I mentioned earlier that Dailin will be seeing some buffs over onto Nunchaku. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I forget if it was on the previous take or not, but that's fine here. Nunchakus across the board will be getting a buff in regards to its power. Attack power going to be increased by 3 for blue 3, and crit chance going to be increased by 2%. Fiber Nunchaku, a ton more attack power, a whole 6 added onto it, but the attack speed is going to be dropped a little bit, which should be fine. 50% attack speed for Vibro Nunchaku over the course of this game's life cycle has almost been overdoing it, so a bit of a nerf on that is going to be completely fine. And Cerberus will also be seeing a buff on its attack power as well. Frost Venom Dart for Shuriken will be seeing a bit of a buff here as well, a whole 4 skill amp. Not that many people use this weapon, so very nice to see it getting buffed here compared to the other ones. Sniper Rifle, Gauss Rifle will be seeing a bit of a nerf. Deadly Ray will also be seeing a bit of a nerf. Polaris a nerf, and NTW also getting a nerf. But on the positive side for the players who like Sniper Rifle, we are going to be getting Andromeda as a new transition weapon, and it's going to be using up a Meteorite. Basically a transition for Polaris. The only character off the top of my head that can use this is going to be Bernice, but still a very nice fact that, Sniper Rifle characters are going to have a transition post-Polaris, since a lot of people just either tended to stick onto Polaris even until late game, or kind of swap between Polaris as well as TAC 5, I think it was, or whatever that specific sniper rifle was. Next up is going to be Spear, Dragon Guandel getting a buff, as well as Blazing Lance getting a similar treatment as well. For whips, Plasma Whip getting a buff, and Oranos also getting a buff as well. Cameras, Skill Amp for instant camera, not really that important, but an additional buff there as well for 4. Frozen Echo going to be getting a bit of a nerf. Isaac still has been doing pretty well, I would say, across the board, so a bit of a nerf onto the weapon that he mainly uses as his transition. And for Throw, Fireball getting a buff, which is kind of surprising because Fireball has a really good passive effect of Magnetic Midnight as well. So I don't know if I like that, but I guess Fireball users are going to be happy about that one too. Next up, Bow is going to get 4 additional skill amp, as well as Ancient Bolt, again getting a similar change here, but they're not going to be getting any additional buffs over onto its other stats, just lesser damage with each auto attacks on the current subject's current HP. There we go, that's what I meant to say, the test subject's current HP. And for Argy, we will be seeing a buff over onto the Armor Pen. Next up, let's talk about some of the armor changes. Not too many things. The only thing off the top of my head, really Crusader armor, and I think Sanguine Goombai as being the main changes across the board. It's just very, very simple nerfs or buffs. Sheet Metal armor, nerf. Rocker's jacket, slightly buffed. And for Crusader armor, very similarly to Crusader helmet, it'll be getting Crusade. So that means the base stats have been nerfed, but the unique passive has been added. That means when your health drops below a certain HP threshold, you will be getting a shield and a slight buff to your stats for a limited duration of time. Mithril Armor a nerf, Mithril Crop a nerf, and Holy Orders will also be seeing a nerf as well. Crusader Helmet going to be seeing a bit of a nerf here, and a bit of a nerf over onto Crusade. A lot of characters have been using Crusader Helmet recently, whether or not they need to. So we will be seeing a little bit of a nerf there to make sure that viability for other helmets will be a thing for other characters. Sultan's Turban will be seeing a buff in regards to its movement speed. Corrupting Touch will be seeing a buff to its amp. Tellurian Timepiece actually getting a buff. The only weapon, the only item to be getting solely a buff that has Vigor on it. Attack speed increase per stack will be 15% instead of 12 now. Red Shoes going to be getting a nerf in regards to its attack power, but its utility of reducing healing will be amplified by a whole 20%. That is massive for that item. Alexander, on the other hand, will be getting a slight nerf over on the defense. For accessories, Hawkeye is going to get slightly buffed. Dice of Destiny is going to be nerfed a little bit in regards to its critical strike damage, which is in line with what we saw during 0.76, just nerfs to crit items across the board. And for Sanguine Goombai, we will be seeing the reduction of, well, removal entirely of the unique skill amplification increase, but instead giving it more cooldown reduction as well as more movement speed from the Swift Stride. So solely putting it as a utility-based accessory more so than a split between half and half, which is kind of nice. There's a lot of characters at the late point in the game where they already have Persona or another weapon that has this stat already on it that would have liked to see a little bit more of a useful stat compared to the other one, so pretty nice that they did end up adding this change to Sanguine Goombai. Eye of Horus will be getting additional attack speed. Again, Eye of Horus, a weapon that or an accessory that has Biotic Confusion on it, so very nice to be able to proc that a lot more often. Emote will also be seeing a buff, casting time reduced by 0.5 seconds. Arc Reactor going to be seeing a buff here. Not that great of an item, I feel like, considering how expensive it is, but it will be seeing a buff in regards to its cooldown, so a lot more accessible. And Clodogg Ring, yet again, will be getting a nerf here. Tethering does not let you share damage at all, so don't trust the guides that say that Clodogg Ring will let you share damage. It does not anymore as of 0.77. Now, one miscellaneous change that was added into this game. Now, I kind of wanted to add this during the mechanic changes, but it's not exactly a game mechanic change, so I kind of left it out for this part. Function to auto-accepting solo mode matching. This is a huge buff over onto the North American server. Now, of course, that's a joke, but players queued up for solo mode will now automatically accept games when the queue pops. So every single time you do queue up for your solo mode and the game itself pops, you should be able to see a game starting. Team modes, on the other hand, will still include the option of accepting and declining due to the potential of missing teammates, and that is completely fine, but a cool function that is being added into the game at 0.77. Now, as for the new content that is going to be added during 0.77, we do have the Shukai skin that will be added. Hungry Panda Shukai, rare, will be added for purchase. And secondly, we're going to be able to see Sweet Valentine Ava. Now, this character skin, on the other hand, you're not going to be purchasing, but it'll be available as part of an event. So a free skin that we're going to be getting in this patch as well, and it looks very, very nice just looking at the splash art in and of itself. So highly recommend you try to participate in the event when it releases. Now, that's going to be it for patch 0.77. Pretty much everything of note that I wanted to talk about has been covered, but I will say there's been a lot of stuff that I talked about during this patch that I'm not particularly happy about, which means that overall reflects on my thoughts about the patch in and of itself as well. A lot of changes to characters that I was very much confused about, so that's going to be something that kind of affects my rating on this patch. Battle zone still being adjusted, which is a good thing, but it feels like it's happening a little bit too slow. It kind of feels like it should be happening as soon as those problems are caught on, because it becomes something that feels like it's being dragged out throughout the entire patch until the next major one. Competitive scoring changes will also change in line with the battle zones. We've already gotten notice of this, especially with the Lumia Squad Cup that is happening in KR very soon, where battle zone kills are straight up just going to cost 0. Well, actually, not cost, but give you 0 for your team. So quite interesting there. Good LP changes we did talk about for the ranked ladder, which is going to be nice if it works. It has to be something that works throughout the course of the patch here. A lot of people have been very, very frustrated with that during 0.76, so hopefully it is a good change. And last but not least, before I go here, the KR roadmap is finally being updated again. That roadmap function has been kind of neglected by Nimble Neuron for a while, but they've been working on a lot of things, so it is a little bit understandable in that regards. For my final rating of patch 0.7, as of right now, of course, before we actually start being able to play the patch in and of itself, it will be 5 out of 10. A lot of changes, as I just mentioned, not exactly in line with something that I was anticipating for this patch. So unfortunately, only a 5 out of 10 will be what I give this patch. But of course, everything throughout this video has been pretty much my opinions as well as my evaluations of this patch, but what matters is what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought about patch 0.77. Of course, I'll link this as well down in the comments below too, so you guys can take a look at it for yourself if you want to. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video, whichever one that might be. Have a good one, guys.